Captain Sarah Chen had always been invisible in the best possible way. While her fellow pilots strutted through the corridors of Nellis Air Force Base with their flight suits perfectly pressed, and their confidence radiating like heat waves off the Nevada desert, Sarah moved quietly between the shadows of their larger-than-life personalities. She was the one who double-checked fuel calculations when others rushed through pre-flight inspections. She was the pilot who stayed late to review weather patterns while her squadron mates headed to the officers' club. She was competent, reliable, and utterly forgettable. The 402nd Fighter Squadron was home to some of the Air Force's most decorated pilots. There was Major Jake "Thunder" Morrison, whose aggressive flying style had earned him 3 air-to-air combat victories in overseas operations. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus "Viper" Rodriguez commanded respect with his 15 years of experience and an impressive collection of medals that clinked softly when he walked. Captain Tommy "Rocket" Walsh could execute barrel rolls that made seasoned pilots dizzy just watching. These were the pilots who got mentioned in briefings, whose photos appeared in military publications, whose stories were told and retold in mess halls across the base. Sarah understood her place in this hierarchy. She was support staff with wings, the reliable backup who could be counted on to fly steady formations and execute textbook maneuvers without flash or flare. Her call sign wasn't something dramatic like lightning or maverick. The other pilots simply called her steady, which she suspected was less about her flying and more about how utterly predictable she seemed to everyone around her. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in March. Sarah arrived at the squadron, building 30 minutes before the scheduled briefing, her habit of early arrival so ingrained that she often found herself alone in the ready room, reviewing charts and checking equipment while the base slowly came to life around her. The mission briefing board showed a routine training exercise scheduled for later that afternoon, a formation flying drill designed to keep their skills sharp during a lull between deployments. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the squadron commander, strode into the briefing room with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. She was a woman who had fought tooth and nail for every promotion in a career that spanned 2 decades, and her leadership style reflected the battles she had won along the way. Behind her walked Lieutenant General Robert Hayes, a visiting dignitary from Pentagon whose presence immediately elevated the importance of what everyone had assumed would be a routine training day. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hendricks announced as the pilots settled into their seats, "today's exercise has been modified. General Hayes is here to observe our squadron's readiness for a classified operation that some of you may be selected for in the coming weeks." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Sarah could feel the tension rise as her fellow pilots straightened in their chairs, each one undoubtedly calculating their chances of being chosen for whatever prestigious assignment was on the horizon. These were the moments that defined military careers, the opportunities that separated the memorable pilots from the forgettable ones. Thunder Morrison leaned forward in his seat, his jaw set with determination. Viper Rodriguez's eyes narrowed as he studied the general's expression for any hint about the mission's nature. Rocket Walsh's leg bounced with barely contained excitement. Around the room, the squadron's alpha personalities began their subtle competition for attention and recognition. Sarah remained motionless in her seat near the back of the room, her notebook open to a fresh page, her pen ready to record whatever details emerged from the briefing. She had long ago learned that her role in these situations was to absorb information, not to compete for spotlight. While others postured and positioned themselves, she focused on the practical aspects of whatever mission lay ahead. "The exercise will simulate a deep reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines," General Hayes explained, his voice carrying the weight of real combat experience. "Your target is a heavily defended installation approximately 200 miles into hostile territory. Intelligence suggests the facility houses critical strategic assets, but the exact nature of those assets remains classified even from this briefing." Sarah's pen moved steadily across her notebook as she recorded details that others seemed to consider beneath their attention. Weather patterns, fuel requirements, communication protocols, emergency procedures. While her squadron mates mentally rehearsed heroic scenarios, Sarah was calculating the practical challenges that could determine the mission's success or failure. The mission profile requires extreme precision flying at low altitude. To avoid radar detection, the general continued, you'll be flying in radio silence through mountain valleys, maintaining formation in challenging terrain, and executing a complex extraction sequence under simulated combat conditions. Thunder Morrison's hand shot up immediately. "Sir, what type of opposition can we expect? Air-to-air threats? Surface-to-air missiles?" General Hayes smiled slightly. "All of the above, Captain Morrison. This exercise is designed to test every aspect of your squadron's capabilities under maximum stress." The briefing continued for another hour, covering technical specifications, communication codes, and contingency plans. Sarah filled page after page with meticulous notes while her colleagues asked increasingly elaborate questions designed to showcase their tactical knowledge and aggressive instincts. She noticed details that others overlooked. Inconsistencies in the flight plan that suggested complications the briefers hadn't fully addressed. When Colonel Hendricks announced the pilot assignments, Sarah wasn't surprised to find herself listed as backup support. Thunder Morrison would lead the primary formation. Viper Rodriguez would command the secondary strike group. Rocket Walsh would handle close air support coordination. The squadron's most visible personalities had been assigned the most visible roles. Exactly as everyone expected, Sarah's assignment was to fly a solo reconnaissance sweep of the alternate extraction route, gathering intelligence on backup options in case the primary mission plan failed. It was the kind of unglamorous but essential work that perfectly matched her reputation for steady competence without spectacular achievement. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out to prepare for the afternoon exercise, Sarah remained in her seat, studying her notes and mentally rehearsing the complex navigation required for her reconnaissance route. She had traced and retraced the flight path, identified potential hazards, and calculated fuel consumption, down to the gallon. What Sarah didn't know was that her meticulous preparation and attention to seemingly minor details would soon become the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The exercise that was supposed to showcase the squadron's elite pilots was about to become a test of something far more valuable than flashy flying skills. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the flight line as the squadron prepared for departure. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection with the same methodical attention she applied to everything else, checking each system twice while other pilots rushed through their preparations with the confidence of experience. Her F-16 Fighting Falcon gleamed in the desert heat, every surface meticulously maintained by ground crews who appreciated her habit of treating their work with respect. As she strapped into her cockpit, Sarah could hear the radio chatter from the primary formation pilots. Thunder Morrison's voice crackled with excitement as he coordinated with his wingman. Viper Rodriguez was running through tactical scenarios with his strike group. Rocket Walsh was making jokes about the simulated enemy forces they would encounter. The frequency buzzed with the kind of aggressive confidence that had made these pilots legends in their own minds. Sarah switched to her assigned frequency and ran through her own checklist in silence. Her reconnaissance route would take her through a series of narrow mountain valleys west of the primary target area, mapping alternate extraction points and identifying potential threats that could complicate the main mission. It was solitary work that required precise navigation and constant vigilance. Exactly the kind of assignment that played to her strengths while keeping her away from the glory of the primary objective. The mission launched precisely on schedule. Sarah watched the primary formation disappear into the distance before banking west toward her assigned sector. The Nevada landscape spread out beneath her aircraft like a vast geological textbook, layers of rock and sand telling stories of millions of years of change. She flew low and fast through valleys that most pilots avoided, threading her way between peaks that rose like ancient monuments to forces beyond human understanding. 20 minutes into her reconnaissance sweep, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten with concern. The weather briefing had mentioned scattered clouds in the target area, but what she saw developing to the east looked like the beginning of a serious storm system. Dark clouds were building with unusual speed, their towering formations suggesting the kind of severe weather that could turn a routine training exercise into a life-threatening emergency. She switched frequencies and tried to raise the primary formation, but received only static in response. The mountain terrain was notorious for blocking radio communications, and the growing storm was probably making the interference worse. Sarah made a decision that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew her. Instead of continuing her assigned reconnaissance route, she climbed to a higher altitude to get a better view of the developing weather situation. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. A massive thunderstorm was rapidly moving toward the target area, bringing with it the kind of severe turbulence, lightning, and reduced visibility that could scatter a tight formation and send aircraft into mountainsides. The storm's movement was faster than anything the weather briefers had predicted, and its path would intersect the primary mission route in less than 30 minutes. Sarah's mind raced through calculations as she watched the storm develop. The primary formation was flying in radio silence as briefed, which meant they had no way of receiving updated weather information. Their flight plan would take them directly into the worst part of the storm, just as they reached the most challenging phase of their mission. Viper Rodriguez's strike group was approaching from the south and would hit the weather first. Thunder Morrison's lead formation would encounter it minutes later, while navigating the most difficult terrain of their route. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Breaking radio silence to warn the other pilots would violate their orders and potentially compromise the training exercise. Military protocols existed for good reasons, and pilots who made unauthorized decisions, even with good intentions, often found themselves facing disciplinary action or worse. But as she watched the storm continue to build and move toward her squadron mates, Sarah realized that following protocol could get people killed. She switched to the emergency frequency and began transmitting. Any station, this is steady with urgent weather advisory. Severe thunderstorm moving rapidly toward primary target area. Recommend immediate abort and return to base. Static answered her initial call, but Sarah continued broadcasting as she maneuvered for better line-of-sight communication with the target area. She climbed higher, pushing her aircraft toward the edge of its operational envelope while trying to establish contact with the formation leaders. The storm was moving faster now, its leading edge already beginning to engulf the southern approach route where Viper's strike group should be arriving. Finally, a voice crackled through the static. Steady, this is Viper. Say again your last transmission. We're encountering some weather here, but nothing serious. Sarah's heart pounded as she keyed her microphone. Viper, you're flying into a severe thunderstorm. I'm observing from the west and can see the full system. You need to abort immediately and find alternate routing. There was a long pause before Viper responded, and when he did, Sarah could hear the strain in his voice. Steady. We're experiencing moderate turbulence and some visibility issues, but we're maintaining formation and continuing to target. Negative, Viper. Sarah's voice carried an urgency that surprised even her. This storm is much worse than briefed. You're about to fly into severe turbulence and possible wind shear. Your formation is going to get scattered. As if to prove her point, the radio suddenly filled with confused voices as Viper's strike group encountered the full force of the storm. Through the static and interference, Sarah could hear pilots calling out positions, reporting loss of visual contact and struggling to maintain control in increasingly violent air. The carefully planned formation was dissolving into chaos as individual aircraft fought to survive the unexpected weather. Sarah immediately began broadcasting navigation assistance, using her position outside the storm to guide disoriented pilots toward clearer air. She had memorized every detail of the terrain below, and now that knowledge became crucial as she helped scattered aircraft find safe routing away from both the weather and the mountains that posed an even greater threat in reduced visibility. All aircraft. This is steady. If you can hear me, turn to heading 270 and climb to 8,000 feet. That will take you clear of both the weather and the terrain. She repeated the instructions continuously while monitoring multiple frequencies, trying to reach every pilot who might be struggling in the storm. Thunder Morrison's lead formation was still approaching the target area, apparently unaware of the disaster developing ahead of them. Sarah realized that her warnings needed to reach them before they flew into the same conditions that had scattered Viper's group. But the storm was now blocking most radio communications, and her own aircraft was being buffeted by increasingly violent winds as the system continued to expand. Sarah's F-16 shuddered violently as she flew closer to the storm system, trying to establish line-of-sight communication with Thunder Morrison's approaching formation. The turbulence was unlike anything she had experienced in years of flying, with sudden updrafts and downdrafts that tested both her aircraft's structural limits and her own ability to maintain control. Ice began forming on her canopy as she climbed through clouds that hadn't existed when the mission launched. Through breaks in the cloud cover, she could see lightning striking the mountain peaks below with frightening frequency. The storm had developed into something far beyond the scattered clouds mentioned in the weather briefing, transforming into a meteorological monster that could destroy aircraft and kill pilots who encountered it unprepared. Sarah's instruments showed wind speeds that would make formation flying nearly impossible and visibility that had dropped to almost zero in the worst areas. Her radio crackled with fragments of distressed communications from Viper's scattered strike group. She could hear pilots calling out their positions, reporting instrument failures, and requesting emergency vectors to safe airspace. The carefully choreographed exercise had become a desperate survival situation in a matter of minutes. Ground control was trying to respond, but the storm was interfering with their radar tracking and communication capabilities. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 2, came a strained voice through the static. "I've lost visual references and my navigation system is showing errors. Request immediate assistance." Sarah immediately responded, her own voice steady despite the violence of the air around her aircraft. "Viper 2, this is steady. Turn left to heading 300 and begin descent to 6,000 feet. That will take you out of the worst weather and toward clear air." "Steady, I can't see anything out here." "How do you know where the clear air is?" "I'm positioned west of the storm system and can see the entire weather pattern. Trust me and follow my vectors. I'll guide you to safety." For the next several minutes, Sarah became an airborne air traffic controller, using her unique position outside the storm to guide lost pilots to safety. Her extensive knowledge of the local terrain, combined with her methodical study of the mission flight plans, allowed her to provide precise navigation instructions that led scattered aircraft away from both the weather and the dangerous mountains below. But Thunder Morrison's lead formation was still approaching the target area, and Sarah's attempts to contact them were met with static. She realized that someone needed to reach them before they encountered the same conditions that had destroyed the carefully planned exercise. Making a decision that would have terrified most pilots, Sarah turned her aircraft toward the heart of the storm. Flying into severe weather was contrary to every principle of aviation safety, but Sarah calculated that her intercept course would allow her to reach Thunder's formation before they entered the worst part of the storm system. Her aircraft bucked and rolled as she penetrated the outer edges of the weather, fighting to maintain control while searching for any sign of the approaching formation. The visibility inside the storm was terrifying. Sarah found herself flying through a gray-white void where up and down became meaningless concepts. Her instruments became her only connection to reality as she navigated by pure skill and determination. Ice accumulated on her wings faster than her anti-icing systems could remove it, adding weight and changing her aircraft's flying characteristics in dangerous ways. Through a brief break in the clouds, Sarah spotted the distinctive formation of F-16s approaching from the east. Thunder Morrison's group was flying in perfect formation, apparently unaware of the atmospheric chaos they were about to encounter. Sarah immediately switched to their frequency and began broadcasting urgent warnings. "Thunder, this is steady. You are approaching severe weather. Recommend immediate abort and return to base." Thunder's response was confident and dismissive. "Steady, we show light clouds ahead. Mission continues as briefed." "Negative, Thunder. I'm inside the storm system and can tell you it's much worse than briefed. You're about to encounter severe turbulence, icing, and zero visibility. Your formation will not survive intact." There was a pause before Thunder responded, and Sarah could hear the irritation in his voice. "Steady. Maintain your assigned frequency and continue your reconnaissance mission. We don't need flight safety lectures from backup pilots." Sarah's jaw tightened as she realized that Thunder's ego was preventing him from accepting potentially life-saving information. She watched helplessly as the lead formation continued toward the storm, their perfect alignment about to be shattered by forces beyond any pilot's ability to control. In less than 5 minutes, they would encounter the same conditions that had scattered Viper's experienced strike group. Making another split-second decision, Sarah positioned her aircraft directly in the path of the approaching formation. If Thunder wouldn't listen to her radio warnings, perhaps a visual demonstration would convince him of the danger ahead. She began a series of dramatic maneuvers designed to get the formation leader's attention, rocking her wings and firing flares to create an unmistakable signal. Thunder's voice came over the radio with barely controlled anger. "Steady, get out of our flight path immediately. You're interfering with the mission." "Thunder, look at my aircraft," Sarah responded, her voice cutting through his protests. "I'm covered in ice and barely maintaining control, and I'm in the lightest part of the storm. What you're flying into will kill someone." For the first time, Sarah heard uncertainty in Thunder Morrison's voice. Through her canopy, she could see him studying her ice-covered aircraft and the dark wall of clouds that stretched across their intended route. The visual evidence of severe weather was impossible to dismiss, even for a pilot whose confidence bordered on arrogance. All aircraft. This is Thunder. Formation will hold current position while we assess weather conditions ahead. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief as she watched the formation level off and enter a holding pattern. But her relief was short-lived as she realized that simply stopping wasn't enough. The storm was continuing to expand and move, and soon there would be no safe route back to base for any of the scattered aircraft. The exercise had become a genuine emergency that required immediate action and exceptional flying skills to resolve. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah's radio monitoring revealed that 3 pilots from Viper's scattered strike group were reporting low fuel levels after fighting the storm for nearly an hour. Rocket Walsh's close air support element had lost contact with ground control entirely and was navigating by dead reckoning through mountain valleys where a single navigation error could prove fatal. Thunder Morrison's lead formation remained in holding pattern, but the storm system was expanding toward their position, threatening to engulf them as well. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Her own fuel was running dangerously low after extended high-power flying in severe weather conditions. Her aircraft had accumulated so much ice that her control responses were sluggish and unpredictable. Any rational pilot would have immediately headed for the nearest airfield to land before her situation became critical. But Sarah could see the complete tactical picture in a way that no other pilot could from their scattered positions. She had become the only link between the various elements of the squadron and their only source of reliable navigation information. Ground control's radar was being intermittently blocked by the storm, and their ability to provide assistance was severely limited. If Sarah abandoned her position to save herself, other pilots might not survive the next hour. Her decision was made without conscious thought. Sarah continued to coordinate the scattered aircraft while calculating emergency landing options for pilots who were running critically low on fuel. She had memorized every airfield within 200 miles during her methodical mission preparation, knowledge that was now proving invaluable for pilots who had never needed backup plans before. Viper 2, your closest emergency landing site is Beatty Airfield, bearing 045 degrees, approximately 30 miles from your current position. It's a civilian strip, but long enough for emergency landing. Steady, I don't have charts for civilian airfields. Can you provide runway information? Sarah's response came without hesitation. Runway 0927, 4,500 feet long. No approach lighting but VFR conditions on the ground. Field elevation is 3,200 feet. Contact Unicom frequency 122.8 for traffic advisory. She had similar information ready for every pilot who needed it, having spent countless hours studying aviation charts that other pilots considered unnecessary detail work. Her reputation for excessive preparation was suddenly the difference between successful emergency landings and potential disaster thunder. Morrison's voice cut through the emergency communications with reluctant respect. Steady, we need immediate routing back to base. Can you provide vectors around this weather system? Sarah studied the storm's movement and calculated safe routing for the various aircraft scattered across nearly 100 square miles of dangerous terrain. Her mental picture of the tactical situation was more complete than anything available to ground control, and her intimate knowledge of local geography allowed her to identify corridors of clear air that others couldn't see. Thunder. Turn left to heading 180 and descend to 7,000 feet. That will take you south of the storm's leading edge. Once clear of the weather, turn right to 270 for direct routing to Nellis. What about terrain clearance at 7,000 feet? You'll have 1,500 feet clearance over the highest peaks along that route. I've checked every obstacle between your position and base. As Thunder's formation began following her routing instructions, Sarah continued coordinating with the other scattered elements. Rocket Walsh needed vectors to avoid a mountain ridge that his damaged navigation system couldn't accurately locate. 2 of Viper's pilots required precise timing to safely transit a narrow valley where conflicting air traffic made coordination critical. Sarah's own situation was becoming desperate. Her fuel gauge showed less than 20 minutes of flying time remaining, and the ice accumulation on her aircraft was affecting her ability to maintain level flight. Every few minutes she had to use short bursts of afterburner to prevent her airspeed from dropping below safe limits, burning precious fuel she couldn't afford to waste. But even as her own aircraft struggled with increasingly dangerous conditions, Sarah maintained her steady stream of navigation assistance and tactical coordination. Her voice remained calm and professional over the radio, providing no hint of the life-threatening situation she was managing in her own cockpit. Ground control. This is Steady. All Squadron aircraft have been provided emergency routing around severe weather. Recommend you coordinate with Beatty Airfield and Henderson Executive for possible emergency landings by aircraft with low fuel states. The response from ground control revealed their relief at finally having accurate information about the scattered formation. Steady, we copy your coordination efforts. Be advised we're showing you in a dangerous position relative to the storm system. What is your current status? Sarah hesitated before responding, unwilling to add her own emergency to the already complex situation facing the squadron. Ground control. Steady is managing current conditions and continuing coordination mission. What she didn't mention was that her aircraft was barely controllable due to ice accumulation. Her fuel was approaching emergency levels, and she was flying in weather conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Her focus remained entirely on getting her squadron mates safely back to base, regardless of the personal cost. Thunder Morrison's formation was the first to reach clear air, following Sarah's precise routing instructions to safety. His relief was obvious in his radio transmission. Steady. Thunder formation is clear of weather and proceeding to base. Your navigation was spot on. One by one, the other scattered elements began reporting successful navigation around the storm system. Viper's pilots found the emergency airfields that Sarah had identified. Rocket Walsh's close air support group emerged from the mountain valleys with Sarah's terrain avoidance guidance. The carefully planned exercise had become a demonstration of crisis management and emergency navigation skills that none of them had expected to need. But Sarah's own crisis was reaching its conclusion. Her fuel quantity was now measured in minutes rather than gallons, and her ice-covered aircraft was demanding constant attention to prevent departure from controlled flight. She had successfully coordinated the safe recovery of every other aircraft in the squadron, while sacrificing her own safety margins to remain in position throughout the emergency. Sarah's fuel warning light had been illuminated for the past 10 minutes, its red glow a constant reminder that her time in the air was nearly over. Her aircraft felt heavy and sluggish as ice continued to accumulate faster than her anti-icing systems could manage. Every control input required more effort than normal, and she could feel the aircraft wanting to depart from controlled flight if she relaxed her attention for even a moment. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. While successfully coordinating the emergency recovery of every other aircraft in the squadron, she had put herself into a position where her own survival was far from certain. The nearest suitable airfield was still 15 minutes away at normal cruise speed, but her fuel-starved engines and ice-laden aircraft couldn't maintain normal performance parameters. Ground control. This is Steady declaring emergency. Low fuel state and severe icing conditions. Request priority handling for immediate landing. The response was immediate and professional. Steady ground control copies your emergency declaration. You are cleared direct to Nellis with priority handling. Emergency equipment is being positioned. State your fuel remaining and souls on board. Fuel remaining approximately 10 minutes, souls on board 1. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the gravity of her situation. She had trained for emergencies like this throughout her career, but training scenarios never included the exhaustion and stress of coordinating a squadron-wide crisis while simultaneously managing her own aircraft in deteriorating conditions. As she began her approach to Nellis, Sarah could see the other squadron aircraft already on the ground or in the traffic pattern. Thunder Morrison's formation had landed safely using her routing guidance. Viper's scattered pilots had reached their emergency airfields without incident. Rocket Walsh's group had emerged from the mountains with terrain clearance that Sarah had calculated from memory. Everyone was safe except the pilot who had made their survival possible. Her approach to Nellis was complicated by the ice accumulation that had changed her aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. Sarah found herself flying a heavier, less responsive machine that required constant attention to maintain proper airspeed and glide path. The runway appeared through her ice-covered windscreen like a narrow ribbon of salvation, but reaching it safely would require every bit of skill she had developed over years of methodical preparation and practice. Steady. Tower clears you to land runway 03 left. Emergency equipment is standing by. Report any difficulty maintaining approach parameters. Sarah keyed her microphone with fingers that were beginning to cramp from gripping the controls. Tower. Steady is experiencing control difficulties due to icing but maintaining approach. Will advise if go-around becomes necessary. What she didn't mention was that a go-around was no longer an option. Her fuel state was so critical that this approach represented her only chance to reach the runway before her engines stopped producing power. The mathematics of fuel consumption and distance remaining had narrowed her options to a single attempt at landing. The approach seemed to take forever, with Sarah fighting constant control inputs to maintain proper flight path, while monitoring engine parameters that showed dangerously low fuel flow. Her aircraft wanted to sink below the proper glide slope, and correcting the tendency required power settings that burned fuel she couldn't spare. Every second of flight time brought her closer to the moment when her engines would quit from fuel starvation. At 500 feet above the runway, Sarah's aircraft suddenly pitched nose down as a large chunk of ice broke away from her horizontal stabilizer. The abrupt change in aerodynamics nearly sent her into an unrecoverable dive, but her quick reflexes and intimate knowledge of her aircraft's characteristics allowed her to regain control before the situation became catastrophic. Emergency vehicles on the ground accelerated toward the runway threshold, their crews preparing for what appeared to be an imminent crash landing. Sarah leveled her aircraft just above the runway threshold, her engines beginning to surge and sputter as they drew the last usable fuel from her tanks. The landing was harder than any she had made in years, but her aircraft touched down safely and rolled to a stop less than halfway down the runway. Fire trucks and medical vehicles surrounded her aircraft before she had even finished her shutdown checklist. As she climbed out of her cockpit on shaking legs, Sarah was met by Colonel Hendricks and several other squadron members who had rushed to the flight line when they heard about her emergency landing. The relief on their faces was evident, but Sarah could also see something else in their expressions that she had never seen before: genuine respect for what she had accomplished. Thunder Morrison was the first to reach her, his usual swagger replaced by obvious humility. "Steady. I owe you an apology and a lot more than that. If you hadn't warned us about that weather, we would have flown right into it." Viper Rodriguez nodded his agreement. "Your navigation guidance saved my entire flight. I've never seen anyone maintain that kind of tactical picture while managing their own emergency situation." Rocket Walsh joined the growing circle of pilots around Sarah's aircraft. "I don't know how you memorized every airfield and terrain feature in a 200-mile radius, but that knowledge kept us from flying into mountains when our navigation systems failed." Colonel Hendricks studied Sarah with the analytical gaze of a career officer who had seen exceptional performance before but rarely under such challenging circumstances. "Captain Chen, I need a complete debriefing on today's events. Your actions during this emergency will be thoroughly documented and reviewed." Sarah nodded, still feeling the adrenaline aftermath of her emergency landing. She had no way of knowing that Colonel Hendricks's debriefing would reveal the full extent of her contributions to the mission, or that her actions would fundamentally change how the squadron viewed both her capabilities and the value of thorough preparation over flashy heroics. The quiet pilot, who had always been considered non-essential backup, had just demonstrated skills and knowledge that proved essential when everything went wrong. But the real revelation of her importance to the squadron's success was yet to come. The debriefing room at Nellis Air Force Base had never felt more crowded or more silent. Every pilot from the 402nd Fighter Squadron sat around the oval conference table, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and growing awareness that something significant had occurred during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Colonel Hendricks occupied her usual position at the head of the table, but today she was joined by Lieutenant General Hayes, whose presence elevated the proceedings far beyond a standard post-mission analysis. Sarah sat quietly near the back of the room, her notebook open to a fresh page despite having already provided a detailed written report of the day's events. Her aircraft was currently undergoing thorough inspection by maintenance crews who were documenting the extent of ice damage and fuel system stress that her emergency landing had revealed. The maintenance chief had already informed Colonel Hendricks that Sarah's aircraft had landed with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining, a margin so narrow that it bordered on miraculous. General Hayes opened the debriefing with an announcement that surprised everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's exercise was not actually a training mission. What you participated in was a live evaluation of this squadron's readiness for a classified reconnaissance operation that will launch within the next 60 days. Your performance under what became genuine emergency conditions has provided us with invaluable data about your collective capabilities." The Room erupted in surprised murmurs as pilots realized they had been unknowingly participating in a real-world assessment. Thunder Morrison's confident expression faded as he understood that his dismissal of Sarah's weather warnings had been observed and documented by senior leadership. Viper Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he recalled how quickly his formation had scattered when confronted with unexpected conditions. The severe weather was not part of our planned evaluation, General Hayes continued. Mother Nature provided us with a stress test that revealed far more about your squadron's capabilities than any scripted scenario could have accomplished. What we observed was a complete breakdown of planned operations, followed by successful crisis management that prevented potential casualties. Colonel Hendricks activated the room's projection system, displaying a detailed timeline of the day's events that had been compiled from radio transcripts, radar tracking data, and individual pilot reports. The visual presentation made clear how rapidly the exercise had deteriorated from organized formation, flying into scattered emergency navigation. At 1430 hours, Captain Rodriguez's strike group encountered severe weather and lost formation integrity, Colonel Hendricks narrated. By 1445, his pilots were scattered across an 80-mile area with compromised navigation systems and declining fuel states. Captain Morrison's lead formation continued toward the target area, despite deteriorating conditions until 1452, when they were warned of severe weather ahead. The timeline continued, showing how individual aircraft had been guided to safety through precise navigation assistance that appeared to come from a single source. Radio transcripts revealed the calm, professional voice that had provided accurate routing information, terrain clearance data, and emergency airfield locations throughout the crisis. What makes this sequence of events remarkable, General Hayes interjected, is that all successful crisis coordination came from one pilot who was simultaneously managing her own life-threatening emergency situation. Captain Chen maintained tactical awareness of the entire squadron, while her own aircraft was accumulating dangerous ice and burning fuel at emergency rates. Thunder Morrison spoke up from across the table, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Sir, I need to acknowledge that I initially dismissed Captain Chen's weather warnings. My assumption was that she was being overly cautious based on limited experience with challenging conditions. General, Hayes studied Thunder with the kind of analytical gaze that had evaluated pilots for 3 decades. Captain Morrison, your assumption was based on Captain Chen's reputation for steady but unremarkable performance. What you failed to recognize was that her methodical approach to preparation had given her capabilities that proved essential when standard procedures failed. The general turned to address the entire room. Captain Chen's performance yesterday demonstrated something that military aviation often forgets. Technical excellence and thorough preparation are not merely backup qualities for pilots who lack natural talent. They are fundamental skills that become critical when exceptional circumstances demand exceptional responses. Colonel Hendricks advanced the presentation to display detailed maps showing the routing that each scattered aircraft had followed to safety. The precision of the navigation assistance became obvious when overlaid with terrain features and weather radar data. Sarah had guided pilots through corridors of clear air that required intimate knowledge of local geography and real-time analysis of changing conditions. These routing solutions were not available in any standard navigation database, Colonel Hendricks explained. Captain Chen calculated safe passages using terrain data and weather information that she had committed to memory during mission preparation. Her ability to maintain this level of tactical awareness while managing her own emergency situation represents exceptional airmanship. Viper Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively. Colonel, I want to confirm that Captain Chen's navigation guidance was completely accurate. My flight followed her vectors through terrain that we couldn't see in the weather, and her altitude recommendations provided perfect clearance over mountain peaks that would have been fatal obstacles. Rocket Walsh added his own testimony. When our navigation system started showing errors in the mountain valleys, Captain Chen provided precise headings and terrain information that kept us from flying into ridgelines. I don't know how she maintained awareness of our position when we weren't even sure where we were. General Hayes stood and walked to the front of the room, his expression serious as he prepared to deliver his final assessment. The classified mission that this squadron is being considered for will require exactly the kind of crisis management and navigation excellence that Captain Chen demonstrated yesterday. Combat operations rarely proceed according to plan, and success often depends on the ability to adapt when standard procedures prove inadequate. He paused to look directly at Sarah before continuing. Captain Chen, your performance yesterday demonstrated that you possess exactly the combination of technical skill, tactical awareness, and calm decision-making that this mission requires. You will be designated as the primary navigation leader for the operation, with full authority to modify routing and coordinate aircraft movement as conditions dictate. The silence in the room was profound as the implications of the general's announcement became clear. Sarah, the pilot who had always been considered reliable backup, was being entrusted with the most critical responsibility for a classified mission that would define the squadron's next deployment. Thunder Morrison was the first to speak, his voice reflecting a humility that had been absent from his previous interactions with Sarah. General, I request permission to serve under Captain Chen's navigation authority for this mission. Yesterday proved that she has skills and knowledge that the rest of us need to learn from. One by one, the other pilots in the room voiced similar requests. The squadron that had once dismissed Sarah as non-essential was now asking to follow her leadership into whatever dangerous operation lay ahead. Her methodical preparation and quiet competence had earned her something that no amount of flashy flying could achieve: the complete trust and respect of pilots who had learned the difference between showmanship and true, professional excellence. Sarah looked around the room at faces that now showed genuine respect, instead of polite dismissal. Her reputation had been transformed in a single afternoon from forgettable backup to indispensable leader. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that her methodical approach to aviation was not a limitation, but a strength that could save lives when everything else failed. The quiet pilot was quiet no more.